and welcome to this week's IG Live. We have a double header for you today, so stay tuned. But right now, I'm excited because I'm going to be talking to Emily Barth Isler, and in about an hour, I'll be talking to Ellie Schwartz. But I also wanted to let you know that we have other things going on, so make sure you look out on our page. We have a giveaway happening that ends tonight at midnight Eastern. So make sure you enter for a chance to win Edie for Equality by Michael Genhart. And we're going to be doing these every week, these weekly giveaways. And so make sure to watch out so that you can enter those. They're always going to start on Tuesday and end Thursday at midnight. So again, make sure you enter the one that we have going on because it ends tonight at midnight. And also our flash sale is going on. So if you're interested in being a sponsor or you want to help out your favorite author, illustrator, you can also buy a sponsorship for them. So make sure to look at our pin post and you'll get everything that you need, all the information you need there. And all of that with the sponsorship, donations helps us continue to do IG Lives like this one. So let's go ahead and dive right in. And as I said, but this is a special week. So I get to talk to Emily Barth Isler right now. And then in about an hour, we'll be talking to Ellie Schwartz. And hello.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm good. It's been a wild morning. We had a little change of plans. As you can see, I'm in my car,
Oh my
but
God.
I feel like nothing exemplifies the author and mom life better than, getting stuck in traffic and being like, okay, I gotta do this
Just
this
talk.
way. So I'm so excited to talk with you, though. It's, just one of those days.
Well, we appreciate you making the effort to be with us. I know that, yes, that sometimes happens. So I appreciate you still being on here with us.
Of course. I wouldn't miss it for anything.
And thank you also for being so flexible. For those that don't know, we actually had this
Sure.
originally scheduled a few weeks ago, and I had to go out of town for a family emergency. So I appreciate your flexibility.
Oh,
And
right back at you. And I hope everything's okay now.
thank you. And well, why don't we go ahead and get into this? I assume a lot of people who are watching probably already know you, but for those that don't, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us what was your journey to becoming an author?
Well, thank you. First of all, just want to thank you for having me. It's such an honor. And I love the work that Read Your World does. And just so excited to get to this opportunity. So my name is Emily Barth Isler, and I'm the author of 2 middle grade books, Aftermath and The Color of Sound. And then I have 2 picture books coming up, and then actually another one in the works that hasn't been announced yet, and a couple other projects coming up. So I'm sort of at the beginning of this exciting journey. And my journey to writing has been a long one, but I'd say sort of started rooted in storytelling. I was a professional child actor, so I grew up from the age of 5 telling stories and being really immersed in the importance of the arts and storytelling. And as I got older, really leaned into my love of writing and wanted to find a different way to tell stories. And I just absolutely love writing for kids and families. I feel like it's an opportunity to talk about difficult things that we need to talk about. And my first book came out in 2021. So I've been out at this, officially for about 3.5 years. And it has just been the most rewarding, wonderful ride so far.
Well, and actually, let's talk about that because, you achieved a lot of success with your first book, which doesn't always happen for a lot of people. Aftermath, it got a lot of attention, got so much praise. Did that put a lot of pressure on you when you went to do your next book, or did that just give you that boost of confidence you needed?
I think it was more the confidence. And I will say one of the best things that happened to me, and I didn't think it was the best thing at the time, is that it took me, it was 6 years from when I wrote Aftermath until when it came out.
Hmm.
It was a long journey, and it was not my first book that I wrote. It wasn't my first book to go on sub. It wasn't my first try. So I think all of that experience of writing other books and sending them out and having them not sell gave me the fortitude to know that it's a marathon, not a sprint. I think the other thing that really kept me going with Aftermath and really helped and taught me a lot is that it's a book it's not just a story, and it's not just about me wanting to be a writer or having a book out in the world. It's a book about an issue that is really important to me. And I think the activism involved in that issue is gun violence in America, and educating people about the prevalence, the need for, you know, legislation and better services for survivors, all of the things that I'm super passionate about, gave me the opportunity to say, I'm going to keep going with this book no matter what. And, you know, because it was important to me as an activist, and I donated a large portion of my proceeds from Aftermath to gun violence prevention organizations. So it felt like it was bigger than just me. It was about something I was so committed to. And so that also gave me the experience of understanding that writing a book and publishing a book isn't just about me. It's about the people who are going to read it, who are hopefully going to benefit from it, learn from it, the conversations it might start. And so in that way, I think Aftermath gave me the incredible confidence boost. And it also helped. I wrote my next book, The Color of Sound, after I had sold it on proposal. And so I got to write it knowing it was going to be published, which is a gift. I think some authors feel like that's pressure, but to me, I think by the time The Color of Sound came out, I had written 10 books and sold 3 of them. I always say I'm like a baseball player. I'm batting 300. So, you know, that's considered successful in baseball. So let's just, you know, oops.
That's what happens when you're live, folks. So,
and that's what happens when you are parenting, and my husband's on a work trip, and I am running the carpools and trying to do everything and be everything. Okay. So we were saying about, yes. So by the time The Color of Sound came out, I had written 10 books. I had sold 3 of them. And I understood very much that not every story ends up getting out there. Sometimes you write something and you love it and it's not meant to be. Sometimes you write something and you don't love it and other people love it, and it, you know, reaches a big audience and you're like, oh, okay, I guess that was, you know, not what I expected. I think I've learned to look at this as a much bigger journey. Of course, I want each book to be meaningful and wonderful and help somebody. But not every book is for everybody, and not everybody is going to love everything. And if I'm lucky, this is a longer journey with many, many, many books and many exciting, you know, unexpected things coming along the way. So we never know. And I didn't feel a lot of pressure. I mean, of course I felt pressure. I wanted The Color of Sound to be as wonderful as possible, but I felt a lot of support from my editor, Amy Fitzgerald, and my publisher, Lerner Books. And because we had done Aftermath together, and then I wrote The Color of Sound already under contract, I had a feeling that, you know, they were going to help me make it the book it needed to be. They were going to support me. It was going to be, you know, it was going to be wonderful. And it turned out it was such a good experience.
Well, let's talk about that. The Color of Sound, you know, it was such a beautiful book, and it recently won, of course, the Pedro and Daniel Intersectionality Book Award finalist. So tell us about the book and what was the inspiration behind it.
I wrote The Color of Sound for myself as a 10, 11, 12-year-old. I always ask myself a couple of questions when I'm thinking about writing a book. Now, I have lots and lots of ideas, and people say, how do you decide which idea you're going to turn into a book? And so these are the questions I ask myself. I say, am I the person to tell this story? Like, do I have the experience to bring to it that's appropriate and not, you know, I'm not appropriating somebody else's story? Like, am I the person to tell this story? And the other questions I ask are, you know, who feels unseen, who needs to be more seen? Like, who's going to read this book and feel like they can see themselves reflected? Or, you know, the wonderful quote about windows, mirrors, you know. And then the last question I ask is, like, who needs this book? You know, and is this the moment for this story? So The Color of Sound came together. I had the idea for it, and I was really thinking about my own experience as a neurodivergent person. And I had sort of kept that to myself for a long time. And with the release of Aftermath, I found myself in a position to talk more about living with OCD and synesthesia, which both come up. It's very sort of unspoken and subtle in Aftermath, and much more out loud in The Color of Sound. And in talking about Aftermath with people, I realized the immense privilege and opportunity I had to talk more about neurodivergence. And I realized also how many people did not know about synesthesia, which is a neurodivergent condition. There are over 80 varieties of it, but the sort of basic principle is more than one sense gets stimulated by a stimuli. So, for example, people with synesthesia, the sort of most common form is people who hear music and see color, or see color and hear music. So it's sort of like the linking of two senses. And I didn't realize I had synesthesia until I was in my 30s, because I only have the experience of my own brain. I had no idea that the way I see and process the world is completely different from how most people see and process the world. And I thought, gosh, if I had read a book like this when I was 10, 11, 12, 13, it would have really helped me understand my brain, maybe be a little more kind and gentle with myself, connect with other people, ask the right questions of the adults in my life to say, like, hey, is this experience something you're experiencing? Is this normal? Is this typical? Sort of feel more seen. So that was a large part of it. And then in the question of sort of like, what can I bring to this story that other people, most other people probably can't, I had the really unique experience of being a child actor and sort of living that double life of living in an adult world sometimes where I was expected to be a professional and trying to also live in normal kid world. And so the main, this book is not autobiographical. I changed, I don't have the kind of synesthesia that Rosie does in the book. I think I have like 5 or 6 identified forms of synesthesia, but they're not the music and color one. I have ordinal lingual personification and a couple of other forms of synesthesia. But I purposefully chose for Rosie to have a different experience than me because it's not autobiographical. And I chose to make her a violin prodigy and not a theater kid, again, because it's not about me. But I did use sort of those experiences as a jumping off point, and also felt like I wanted to talk more about the neurodivergent experience in hopes that the kids who are also neurodivergent might feel seen, and the kids who know someone who's neurodivergent might have more empathy about sort of like how to talk about it, how to, interface with somebody whose brain works differently than theirs.
Yeah, and that's something that you had said, that there are a lot of books that are coming out now, including yours, that normalize things that when we were kids, nobody really talked about.
Oh
Either
my gosh, it was a dirty secret. It was, yeah, for sure.
So what do you hope kids take away from your books?
I really want people, without being toxically positive and being like, everything's great, all differences are, I understand some differences are harder to navigate the world with than others. But I would like to emphasize that overall, I really think the different ways our brains work can be, with the help of therapy and medication and understanding, can be our greatest assets. Like, I really feel like my OCD is the driving force of my writing. The obsessions are, I've managed, again, through therapy and medication, to turn into the what ifs that spur on my creative writing. And then the compulsions I've managed to sort of channel into not giving up and keeping going and trying other angles as a writer. And so that option wasn't presented to me as a kid, that the idea that being neurodivergent could not just be okay, but could help me in some ways. Right. And I understand it's not always that simple, and it certainly hasn't been simple for me. It's been a really long journey to figuring out how to work with my OCD brain and my synesthesia brain and not let it sort of hinder me. But I do want to send the message to people that, like, there's no shame in this. I was raised, I think we all were, society at that time put so much shame around mental illness or neurodivergence. I don't even think we used that word until very recently. I'm sure it was around. I mean, it literally just means brain different. And it would have been so helpful to me as a kid to have creative, successful people stand up and be like, oh yeah, I have OCD, I have synesthesia, like that's okay, and to normalize taking medication if you need it and going to therapy if you need it. And if I get the opportunity to pass that gift on to the next generation, that is like all I've ever wanted. I mean, it sounds silly, but that's my wildest dream. I want the next generation to be better off than I was, to like have the gift of empathy for themselves and for each other.
Yeah, that's so powerful. And I want to go back to one of the things you mentioned. You said, that not all differences are not equal, and that some
Oh,
are more challenging
absolutely.
than others. And I think that's something, and the reason that your book was a finalist for the Pedro and Daniel Award is because you talk about intersectionality. And Rosie is such an interesting character because in some ways she has privilege and none of the ways she doesn't. So how did
Yeah.
you kind of navigate that, kind of the more complex identities? I mean, I feel like it's like a more nuanced discussion about differences and privilege. And so how did you
Well,
approach that?
thank you. Yeah, I'm glad you brought up privileges because that's something I like to talk about. Um, and I don't know if this is exactly what you meant. This might be a slight tangent, but one of the privileges that Rosie has, I mean, first of all, her neurodivergence comes with a musical gift that people look upon positively, which is not always the case with neurodivergence. So that's a huge privilege. But another area where she has privilege is that her family has lots of resources. Her family has money. Her parents have the resources and ability to give her violin lessons, and her mom's whole job is managing her career and taking her to rehearsals and lessons and things. Like there's an immense amount of privilege. They go to visit her grandparents who live in a large house on a big piece of land. But I think one thing I wanted to explore with this book is the idea that I think when I was growing up, I would read books about kids who were wealthy or had a lot of privilege and think that they didn't have problems.
Right.
And I think I and a lot of people grew up thinking that if you could just get to this certain benchmark of wealth and status, that you wouldn't have any problems. And we see a lot of books about the problems, the very very real problems of not having enough resources, and those are super important. But I also wanted to touch upon the fact that having resources does not mean that everything in your life is going to be easy or smooth or okay. And I think that's an important conversation because I don't want people to grow up thinking like, oh, if you just make a lot of money, you'll be fine. There's so much more to it than that. And obviously we're living at a time of incredible income inequality, and there's so much nuance around privilege. But I wanted to show Rosie as a character who has resources, but they're not the resources she needs at that moment, and she has to learn to advocate for herself. And that the real thing she needs is the kind of love and attention from the adults in her life that she's not getting at the beginning of the book. And that's one part of it. The other thing being that outwardly, I think everybody loves a child prodigy. Everybody loves the girl who's, Rosie plays the violin better than most adults. She travels all over the world and plays. That does not mean, obviously, that she has her whole life figured out. And I think I wanted to draw attention to the fact that sometimes adults forget that even children who are exceptionally good at something are still children, and
Right.
trying to figure out who they are, what they want. Just because you're good at something doesn't mean it has to become your whole life. All of these questions I want to raise, and I, certainly did not like answer or solve all of these questions, but I'd like to hope that I raised some of these questions.
Which I think is probably one of the great things about writing middle grade, because I feel like you can get in, raise a lot of questions and get
Yeah.
into a lot of this nuance with middle grade that maybe you couldn't with a picture book. So I'm curious, what has that been like with you? Because I know you said you have a couple, is it your books that are coming out soon are both picture books?
Yeah.
What was
Yeah.
that like switching to writing for a different age group? Because I know you
I
said you like to deal with difficult issues, but I'm sure it's very different
I
for
do. And
children.
one of my picture books does deal with a difficult issue. And then the other one is a much more pure, enjoyable, fun, carefree story. So I'm trying to do some of both, but despite my better intentions, I often end up like taking on something that's a little bit more serious. And I think I'm learning to stop, like chiding myself for it and just be like, okay, this is who I am. This is what I write about. Like this is how I work through my own anxiety. And I guess it's just what my writing is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So writing picture books I found is not that much different. And I don't mean to, like, obviously there are stylistic things, there are different words you might use, there are different ways to tell a story. But when I'm telling a story, I don't necessarily think about it in terms of age range. I sort of think about what will serve the story best,
Mm.
and like some stories need pictures to be complete. Some stories need 60,000 words to be complete. It's more about sort of the idea I get, and then I think, like, what's the best way to tell this story? And so I don't necessarily think about it as like I'm going to sit down and write a picture book. It's
Right.
more of like I let the material lead the way. And I've been lucky enough to partner for both of these upcoming picture books. I have fantastic illustrators that my publishers have hired to collaborate. And I'm struck by how much lifting the art in a good picture book does, and so that's part of it, is like this story needs to be told with pictures and words versus a story in middle grade that might be better suited to just words. So I sort of try and take it as it comes, and I don't think about, also when I'm writing a middle grade story, I'm also writing for adults. I'm writing for the people who work with or live with or love kids who are that age. I always like to say, my middle grade books are for 12-year-olds or anyone who's ever been 12, because I don't think we stop feeling those feelings or caring about those things. We just are, maybe our world gets a little more complicated and, as you said, nuanced. But I also think middle grade is like such an extraordinary opportunity to write books that are conversations between adults and tweens. And so I'm not writing for any particular age grade range. When I write middle grade, I'm really thinking it's because, like, Aftermath is a good example. Before Aftermath, I thought I was writing young adults. I wrote a couple young adult books. And with Aftermath, when the character of Lucy arrived in my head, she was 12 years old. And it was just sort of like who she was. And I thought maybe it was still a YA book with a 12-year-old character, and then learned that, like, that's not really necessarily how it works. And so in some ways, the age of the character ends up defining what genre or what age group it's for. But I don't think that should limit what people decide to read. I think it's a little bit chicken and egg situation. Lucy showed up in my brain and she was 12, so it had to be a middle grade book. I tried to make her older, and it was a totally different story. A 16-year-old dealing with the, moving to a town where there was a school shooting is going to be a very different story than a 12-year-old moving there. And so I realized the stories are more defined by the circumstances and less, like, it sounds silly to say, but in some ways I feel like I don't have control over how old my characters are. They arrive in my head, and that's part of it. It's already in progress, and I'm just like joining into the story and figuring out the best medium to tell it.
Well, so I have so many more questions because I'd love to hear more about your writing process, but I'm looking at the time, so
Well, I'd love to come back, and I promise next time I'll come back from my desk with my books behind me and a nice setup.
Oh no, this is great. Well, but I was wondering, how much can you tell us about your upcoming projects? Are you able to share with us some about that?
Yeah, the next book to come out in spring 2026 is called Three Pieces of Broken Glass.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a picture book. It is the story of my husband's grandmother's life. I was lucky. I met my husband when we were teenagers, so I knew his grandparents pretty well and for a long time. And his grandmother was born and raised in Germany, in Frankfurt. And after Kristallnacht, she and her family had to leave Germany because they were Jewish, and went on a journey that included many stops and many adventures. And I, for a long time, have wanted to find a way to tell her story. And when I was writing it a couple of years ago, I think I figured out the way I wanted to tell the story probably 3 or 4 years ago. It was a different world. And I'm struck by how right now, with everything that's going on in this country, particularly the way we're treating, immigrants and non-citizens, it feels so relevant and so pressing and urgent to tell this story and be able to compare it to our current political situation. So, my husband's grandmother was a Jew in Germany before the Holocaust, and then during the Holocaust, she was able to escape and hide, and then was taken to a work camp, all because she wasn't a citizen. She was a refugee. And I promise it's a hopeful, beautiful book with illustrations by Vesper Stamper, she has made this book beyond my wildest dreams of gorgeous, and really adds so much to the story with her illustrations. But I promise it is a hopeful story about family and about the ways that our generations are connected through time. And I'm sad that we're in the situation we are, but honored and hopeful that this book will resonate with people in a way that I didn't even anticipate when I wrote it. So I can't wait to share it. We're, almost a year away, but time is going to fly. And I hope that by the time this book comes out, maybe we're in a better political situation. But I'm also honored to sort of add to the discussion. Like I said, I try as I might. I guess I like to write about hard things. I can't help it.
Well, it sounds amazing. I can't wait.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And when it does, we will be sure to share about it. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today. Out of your
thanks for having me, and thanks for being so flexible with this wild life. But I do love to, show kids that writers are people, they're moms who are driving the carpool and get stuck in traffic, and it's who we are. It's
Great.
This is part of it.
Well, thank you so much, and thanks to everybody for watching.
You.
If you joined us late, this will be up in just a few minutes on Instagram, and as always, we'll also have it on our YouTube channel. Stay tuned, because in about half an hour, I have another IG Live coming up with Ellie Swartz.
And I love Ellie. Please tell her I said hi. I'm so excited to be next to her.
I love that. I was so afraid, honestly, that it was just chance that you two happened to be booked on the same day, and I thought,
it's so funny.
Ellie, I'm going to call one of you by the wrong name, so I made it through one without getting named.
It's all good. You did great, and honestly, I would be honored any day to be confused with Ellie. I can't think of anything more flattering, so feel free.
That's amazing. All right, well, thank
you so much.
And bye, everybody. Thanks for watching. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.